My name is Ryan Romberg. I'm the pastor of Placentia Presbyterian Church, and this is 3 for the Road. This last Sunday, we started a Lenten series called Journey to the Center of God. We're looking at the book of Job, the entirety of the story, but we can't really nail down every single part because it's long, but we'll be hitting on the journey of Job from where he starts to where he finishes, where he understands God. He says he sees God and repents in dust and ashes. This is a Lenten journey for Lenten people. Let's get to today. Okay, first off, what did we leave out? So I left out the entire beginning of the story, and why did I do that? I think because it gets us so much into this mindset of why do bad things happen to good people that I wanted to just stay away from that right now. However, the beginning of the story is how righteous Job is, blameless. These are words used for people like Noah, Abraham, things like that. This guy Job, most scholars agree, even conservative ones, that Job is a tale of sorts, not a real person, that it was kind of an Aesop's fable of sorts. And this is even kind of conservative scholars. Now, if Job did exist, he would have been during this time of the patriarchs, things like that. Maybe this is a bunch of stories put together of people's lives. It probably is. It just is a deep reflection upon life itself and stuff that we all might experience or maybe fret about in a way too, right? We might fear or think about a lot. What would happen if I was so good and then all this just fell apart and it wasn't my fault, that kind of thing. So Job kind of walks us through that. In the beginning of the story, Job is righteous and blameless. And he is so righteous that he thinks, what if my children sin today? So I'm going to bring an offering to God for my children because maybe they have done something bad. This is a person who really cares a lot about a lot of people, right? Sometimes people would be like, he's a little over the top. This is the parent who's like, maybe my kids are going to hell, that kind of thing, which, for the kids don't usually like that so much. They're like, Mom and Dad, calm down. But it is cool because this person cares a lot for the people in his life. He cares about God and what God has, led him to and his faith. Now, there's no hint there's a Torah here, so, the law of Moses. There's no hint of any sort of foundational piece other than this, connection, this faith with this God. And it's kind of cool in that way because it takes us back to a time before, even Scripture. So anyways, the story of Job takes us through that. It starts there in that place. The other thing I left out, and I said I would talk about it in this video during the sermon, is the part about the sons of God. We've kind of talked about this here and there. There are times when the Bible talks about the sons of God and the sons of man or the daughters of men, that kind of thing. And the sons of God are just a description of spiritual beings. Sometimes they get translated as angels. Very rarely do they get translated as gods. Even though the word, this is fun. The word for God, like the supreme God, Yahweh, our God, is Elohim. It is a plural form of the verb El. And it is kind of wild because it's like a plural form of the one God. And obviously we're Christians, so as Trinitarians, we're like, yes, absolutely. Take it easy on that for right now. So that word is for God. It is also used for not God. It's used for the gods. Like there are the gods in the Hebrew Scriptures. Now you're like, what? What are you saying, Ryan? The word gods is used, and it's not about the one God. And the reason it's used is because this is that generic term for those spiritual beings. And it's pretty striking. Like when you read the Hebrew text, you know the difference between the one God, even though it's the same word, and the gods. And it's pretty clear. They have the same often name or word used for them. Not name, but word. But you can tell the difference. And so this idea of the gods shows up a lot. Now, there's a lot of thinking on this, and a lot of people are uncomfortable because we're monotheists, basically. We're Christians are known as Trinitarian monotheists, right? One God, three persons. That is enough to blow people's minds already. We're not Jewish or Islamic where they are monotheists. We're Trinitarian monotheists. So this idea, though, of one God has stuck so much that we would never even call anything else gods. Like, no, there are no other gods. So you can say a lot about that. Paul actually admits there are gods. He says there are many gods and many lords, but he says you only worship one, right? You see in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not have any other what? Gods before me. Why would you have any kind of command if there were no other gods? The point of it is, and maybe it's more comfortable for us just to call them spiritual beings. Because that word, that G word, is a strong word for all of us that we get a little nervous. So you can just call them spiritual beings. Sometimes the text, like I said, translated in this passage it as angels. That's a whole nother Hebrew word. That's not used here, but they used it anyway. So this idea, though, of spiritual beings is present in the Bible. And spiritual beings, we've talked so much about this in sermons. To pretend like they don't exist. Okay, there's two things. You can either pretend they don't exist and then put everything into the hands of this being called Satan, right? Which we see, or Hasatan, but we could call it Satan, or the devil, right? And the devil versus God. That is not the world of the Bible. That's not really how it's totally painted. True, there is this sense, and especially as the New Testament develops, where the devil and Satan become big, because the devil, is the opposer. It's the adversary. It's the one who pushes against and tries to stop the work of God. But there are plenty of other spiritual beings that also captivate our hearts, that lead us to idolatry, not just the Satan. And a lot of the world in which Satan is like the chief, angel that leads all the other demons. I don't want to get into that. I'm not even sure I see that necessarily, or if that's outside of the biblical text and it just becomes a tradition later. Even the text where it says, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. That's referring to the king of Babylon very clearly in the book of Isaiah. So that's not talking about like a spiritual being. It's like talking about the king of Babylon. But that king of Babylon has some sort of tie to this spiritual being as well. So, there's a lot going on there. It's not just straightforward like we want to make it. We just want to make it like good and bad, light and dark, God and Satan. And it's more than that. God creates the spiritual beings. We're told that in Genesis. God creates these things. You're like, what? Yes, we need them. They help lead and guide our life. In fact, they're seen in the stars and the planets and things. That's what the ancient peoples thought of as spiritual beings. What's wild is those things still do actually kind of guide our life in some ways. And I don't even want to pretend to know how they guide our life. Different scientific studies, things tracking, the effect of even solar flares on humanity's behavior. It's kind of wild. But, as planets move and everything like that, it actually can have effect on us, which is crazy. But here's the thing. We don't give our hearts to it. Okay? So we don't allow ourselves to be guided by those things. They are still important. In the ancient world, there was the gods of war and sex and all sorts of things, right? And these things are part of our lives. They are. So it's not like you could say, no, I don't want any part to do with any of them. You're like, no, they're there for a reason. They're part of our lives, and they're there in right order. You don't get them out of order. You don't put them at the very top. You don't worship these things. They don't become everything for you or for at least the society in which you live. You need to have things in right order where God, the God of the universe, is at the top. And that God reigns and rules over all the other gods. Okay? Do you see how that's important? What's important about it is you can realize that all of these things have a place in our life, but they should not overwhelm us. And when they do, realize there's an idolatry at stake. There is something we're worshiping, and we are no longer worshiping the God of the universe. We're worshiping other things. When country becomes worshiped, that is a god. Now, countries is wonderful. Our nation, our gathering, our people. That is actually what the ancient peoples used to have. They used to have a tribal deity. Our tribal deity is a bald eagle, right? I mean, that's what it is. But when you start to worship that, realize you are not worshiping God. That is just different. So this idea of the Satan, the adversary, the one who pushes against, is pushing against the work of God. And those gods can do that. Yes, even the bald eagle can push against the work of God. And we've seen that in many ways. The gods of our commerce have torn through the lives of many people, particularly minority populations, right? Folks who are a little less powerful, who can be taken advantage of. I mean, we've seen this, right? Just real time in our world. And I think the big thing for us is to realize that when we're talking about the gods, they have a place, they have an order, but they go underneath the God of the universe. And for us as Christians, that is as revealed in Jesus Christ. The life of Christ, the work of Christ, that is God, which is wild to think of that image, Jesus, as being more prominent than a billionaire today. Jesus wasn't a billionaire. Jesus was poor. And that is more powerful than an Elon Musk, than, I don't know, I want to be careful with all the names I use. You might think I'm being political. I'm not. I'm just trying to name billionaires. A Saudi Arabian billionaire, anybody. That Jesus is more powerful. Not just because he's God and he can snap fingers and stuff. No, in his life, the actual life he lived, there's more power in that than the billionaire's life, right? Because those billionaires can be. I don't presume to judge every person's life, but they can be worshiping other things. We've seen that, right? We've seen how people escalate their own power and things over what would be a righteous Christian way of living. The other thing I left out is the second part of Job's disaster story. So in the first part, God says, don't touch Job. In the second part, Satan touches him up and he gets boils and it's bad and he wants to scratch them off with like pottery shards. It is awful. So his own health does get affected the second round. It almost happens again in the story. That's worthwhile saying because this next sermon this week, we're going to be talking about what happens after those things go down. What's the response of the people around him? What's his response? All that kind of stuff. So that's important to know that is coming up. Okay, what are your questions? I didn't get any, and that's fine. I don't want to make any up. So if you have any questions, please use that PPC text line below. What is our invitation? Your invitation this week and this whole Lenten journey is to seek God. Open your Bible. Sit in silence. Direct your heart and your mind. Breathe deeply. Close your eyes if you think that's important. Just rest in the presence of God. We'll be beginning a class this Friday about, it's called Steps. And the beautiful part about it is, we're talking about it as the 12 steps, and you might think, oh, this is like an AA class. It's not. It really is a way for any human to surrender themselves to God. It's what we'll be talking about in the first class. And surrender to God, not to me, right? Not to our church. Surrender to God. Surrender to God. And that does look like surrender to each other. I need to do it. We all need to surrender ourselves to the good God who is powerful, all-powerful, all-loving at the same time. Who's a God of justice and a God of mercy. A God we can trust. So, it's not just about what we get. And that was the sermon, and that is right now too. It's not just about what we get from this God. It's about God, God's self. We get God when we seek God. Because God has sought us. God has come to us. Like Adam and Eve in the garden, God comes and meets Adam and Eve after their sin. Like Jesus, who comes to this world in the midst of our sin and our failure and our fear and the depth of our brokenness. God comes to us in Jesus Christ. Like the Spirit. After how many years have we had this good news of Jesus Christ and we still do things that hurt each other? We still do things for selfish ambition and vain conceit, right? And the Spirit still moves amongst us. And the Spirit still offers guidance to us and counsel when we surrender ourselves to God. Here's the beautiful thing. What I'm not trying to do is cast a spell or anything and say, hey, do this so that the next thing I say, you will do. Like, hey, swinging a watch. I want you to come to me and say, Pastor Ryan, that I was meditating upon the Word of God. I was praying. And the Spirit told me this. And what do you think? And it's not to say the Spirit told me this, so we must do this, right? I pray that you come to me and say, the Spirit said this thing to me. And we'll have a conversation, and I'm not judging whether it's true or not, but I want to hear it. I want you to tell me this. Because I think the discernment within the body must happen at the behest of the Spirit and not our own brains. It doesn't happen here. It'll only happen here and here as we are connected to the Spirit in our midst, to the breath of God. Okay, that's today. That's what we walked through. Isn't it fun? Job. Job is even deeper than that. We could go into so much with Job. This next Sunday, we'll be looking at what happens after Job goes through all of this trauma, and what is the response from him and the people around him. All right, we look forward to having you join us for that. If you have any questions, once again, use the PPC text line below. I really love those questions, and I love interacting with them. So until this Sunday and next time, may God bless you and keep you. We'll see you next time on 3 for the Road.